Hello again, and welcome back to another video of Roblox Studio classes. In this video, we will review how to move, resize, and rotate parts in Roblox Studio. But in this video, we will focus on only using the toolbar. The next video in the series will review using the Properties window to move, resize, and rotate parts. So look out for that video. Being able to manipulate parts by resizing them, rotating them, and moving them is must-know information for creating Roblox games with Roblox Studio. Let's open a template and add a block to the game. If you need to learn about creating parts, changing their color or materials, check out our previous videos in the series that cover these topics. The gray blocks get a little boring to look at, so I'm adding a little bit of color to make it look better. As I mentioned before, in this video we're only going to be focusing on the toolbar to manipulate our parts. Looking at the upper left of Roblox Studio, you'll see both the Home and the Model tab. There are 4 buttons that we want to concern ourselves with. Under the Home tab, we can see those 4 buttons right here: Select, Move, Scale, and Rotate. If we go up to the Model tab, we see those same 4 buttons: Select, Move, Scale, and Rotate. Using the toolbar is really good to initially place your part and do the gross manipulations of it. The Properties window that we'll look at in another video is better for the fine changes, really getting that part exactly where you want sometimes. Go ahead and select your part by left-clicking on it. Then go up to the upper left and click on the Move button. Notice a bunch of arrows appear around our part. Red, blue, and green arrows. We can left-click and drag these arrows to move the part around as we want. You may also realize that the color of these arrows are the same color as the arrows in the compass in the upper right hand corner. This helps you to keep your part orientated in the world. Place your mouse over one of the arrows and you'll notice that the cursor changes from an arrow to a hand. This lets you know that the part is ready to be manipulated in that axis. Comparing the colors of the arrows around the block to the compass, you'll notice that red represents the x-axis, left and right, blue represents the z-axis, forward and backwards, and the green arrow represents the y-axis, which is up and down. Practice moving your part by placing your mouse cursor over the arrow. It changes to the hand. Left-click and hold and drag back and forth. The red arrow is going to move the part in the x-axis, the green in the y-axis, and the blue arrow in the z-axis. That's easy enough. Now, Roblox Studio measures movement in studs, not feet or inches or meters, but studs. We can adjust by what increment our part moves up here in the toolbar under Model. If you notice right here it says 1 studs. A stud is equal to one of those tiny squares we see on the ground. So right now when we move our block, it moves by one of those tiny squares at a time. We can change this value to be smaller or to be larger. Also, if you notice to the left of 1 studs, we see the word move with a check by it. While checked, our block moves that many studs as shown in the box. If we uncheck it, the part will move smoothly. I'll demonstrate that here in a minute. You can type a value in manually into the box for how many studs you want your part to move, or simply you can just click these arrows to the side to increase or decrease the number of studs you want your part to move. So right now you can see the little squares down here. Each of those little squares is 1 stud, and notice when I move the block, it's going to move by 1 stud increments. and I can change this to an even smaller value. Let's say 0.2, and now when I move it, it moves in even tinier increments. 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. Let's look at entering a value in manually. I'll give it a value of 5 studs. So now when I move the block, it should jump by 5 studs. There we go. And if I move it up, it jumps up by 5 studs at a time. If we remove the little check mark next to the word move, this will allow us to move the block freely. Notice it moves smoothly, not in any kind of increments or by studs. It's a very smooth movement. When you create a game, you might want to be really specific about a part's size and its location, exactly how many studs it is. In that case, moving and adjusting your part by studs is important. But other times, things may not line up quite right, and you need to uncheck the move box so you can freely move and adjust the part to fit into your situation perfectly. If you want the arrows to disappear, maybe so you can see the game better, just left click off to the side and the arrows disappear. But realize that you're still in the move mode, even though you don't see the arrows. So this can throw things off sometimes. Let me throw in an extra part here to show you this. I'll drop in a cylinder now. This new part has appeared in the game with arrows on it ready to be moved because we're still in the move mode. I'm going to select a different color here for my part. To get out of the move mode or any other mode like scale or rotate, simply go up to the select arrow in the upper left. Left click and the arrows disappear. However, even though you're only in the select mode, you can still move a part by putting the cursor on top of it, left clicking, and dragging the part around. As I move this part around though, the move box is unchecked, so it's been moving smoothly. Now with it checked, it jumps around when I move by 5 studs because that's what's selected in the box, 5 studs. So that's how you move a part using the taskbar options. It's up to you to decide if you want to move things in increments with studs or if you want to freely move things to your liking. There's no right or wrong. Now let's look at changing the size and dimensions of our part. Go up to Scale in the upper left, click on it, and notice that we have, instead of arrows, the part now has red, green, and blue spheres that we use to adjust the size. Instead of working on a cylinder, because it's special, I'm going to work with a block first. So left click any of these spheres, left click, hold, and drag, just like we did with the arrows to move the part. The part was changing size by 5 studs because it was set to 5 up here. So I'll move that back to 1, and now as I stretch, left click and drag, it's moving in 1 stud increments again. That's more like it. So adjust your part to however you like. Now I'll move on to the cylinder here. It's a little different. If I grab this end and I stretch it, it gets bigger on that axis like we would expect. However, stretching out the part by the blue sphere does not change its size. Why is that? Well, that's because a cylinder has a circle to it. So we have to stretch it in 2 dimensions, the blue and the green. So if I stretch the green up, there we go. Now the cylinder increases in size. So that's a cylinder. Now let's look at adding a sphere and see how a sphere behaves. So I'll select a sphere. Let's go ahead and change its color. Pink is good. Alright, so what do you think is going to happen with a sphere if I change just 1 dimension of it? What do you think? Is it going to change in size, or is it going to stay the same? It changes in size. All you have to do is just move 1 axis and the entire sphere gets larger or smaller. Okay, let's look at the final part. What about a wedge? How do you think a wedge is going to behave? Let's change its color to, let's do green, a bright lime green. So let's stretch it along this axis. Notice it gets longer, but it doesn't get any taller or any wider. The height stays the same. And if we stretch it in this other direction, it becomes fatter. If we grab the green sphere and pull it up, now it angles up higher. So each type of part stretches in its own unique way. A block is straightforward in changing the dimension in one axis. A cylinder, you have to change two axes to adjust the size of the circle. A sphere, you only have to adjust one axis. And a wedge, you'll change the angle of the wedge depending on how you stretch it. So they all have their own unique characteristics. Now let me show you stretching using the Shift key and the Control key, and also a little bit about collisions. I showed you how to change the dimension of a block by grabbing and moving a sphere back and forth. If you hold down the Shift key while you stretch a part, it will change all the dimensions of the part at the same time. So I'll do it here, but notice nothing's happening. What's going on? I just said that holding down the Shift key while stretching should change the entire size of the part, but it didn't. So let me come back to that. If you hold down the Control key while dragging, it changes the dimension of the part on both sides of the part. So if I stretch it back down, both sides stretch down. Now let me show you a proper setup for holding down the Shift key to increase the entire size of a part. I'm going to raise this block up in the air so nothing interferes with it. Go back to scale. Now I'll hold down the Shift key and stretch. This time all the dimensions increase in size when stretching and holding the Shift key. So why didn't this work before for me when I held down the Shift key and tried to make it bigger by stretching? Well, the answer is because there was a collision. Something was in the way blocking this part from getting bigger. If you look up here, do you see that check mark next to collisions? When collisions is turned on, it doesn't permit objects to pass through one another. When I first tried to make the entire block bigger, the block was sitting on the base plate, and the base plate was in the way of the block growing larger. So watch this one more time. Collisions is turned on. I'm going to move this block down, and it hits the base plate. I can't push the block through the base plate because collisions is turned on and base plate is in the way. Now if I uncheck collisions, I can push the block through the base plate. Let me go back to scale again, and let me turn collisions back on. If I hold down the Shift key and I try to make the part grow in all directions, it doesn't work. But now if I uncheck collisions, there, I can stretch the block and it grows in all dimensions, and it even punctures through the base plate. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can grow it a little bit more so it becomes more obvious. See the block sticking below the height of the base plate? And even look, the block now passes through that green wedge because collisions is turned off. So let me show you one more thing here. If I turn collisions back on and I have move selected and I try to move this block, which is going through the base plate, if I try to move it up, it won't work because it's colliding with these parts here. But if I uncheck collisions, now I can slide the block up and through. So let me bring it a good distance up. Alright, I'm going to leave collisions off for now. And let's look at rotate. Notice that there are 3 circles that represent the 3 axes, blue, red, and green. To rotate a part, you're just going to grab one of these axes, left click, hold, and drag. And the amount it rotates is based on this number up here next to rotate. So with rotate checked, it's going to rotate the part by this number of degrees, so 45 degrees. So if I left click on this, you can see these little notches on the circle, and that shows you where the next rotation point is going to be. So let me rotate this, boom. Rotate again, boom. Now if you want a different degree, you can just lower it here with these little arrows, or you can type it in yourself. We'll say 10. Now 10 is a lot less than 45. Now when I click, you can see that the little notches are a lot smaller. They're in 10-degree increments. And I can rotate the block more finely. Of course, you have the option to uncheck rotate altogether, and now you can rotate freely. So it's up to you to determine how you want to rotate your parts. When you move and rotate your parts, there's perspective to take into consideration. So what does that mean? If I select this part and let me change it to move. So right now you see the green arrow is pointing straight up and down. So if I want to move the part straight up, I just slide it up. Let's rotate the part now. And I'll rotate it this much. Now let me switch back over to move. If I want to move this part up and down now, look at my arrow. It's not pointing up and down anymore. It's pointing at an angle. Well, how am I going to bring it straight up and down now? I'd have to do a mixture of this way and this way and this way. I mean, that's not helpful. Well, luckily there's a key that we can press to change the perspective of how we want our parts to move. And it's simple. You press Control L. And that reorientates the perspective to the compass, to the world's x-axis and y-axis and z-axis. But if you want to rotate it back to the part's original axis, just hit Control L again. So in some circumstances, it's helpful to be in one perspective, and in other instances, the other perspective is more helpful. So just keep that shortcut key in mind, Control L. The last thing I want to bring to your attention is anchoring your parts. So sometimes you want a part to defy gravity, to just sit in the air, or to not fall over if a player runs into a part. And that's where anchoring comes in. It's pretty straightforward. Select a part. I have the blue block selected, and if we look at it, it's hanging out in midair. So if we play a game, that big blue block should drop down and hit those other parts, because none of those parts are anchored. So let's look for the play button here, but we don't want to choose regular play the game. We just want to run the game. Click on Test, click on the little arrow under Play, and select Run. And what happens? Boom! Everything comes crashing down because of gravity. Alright, let's stop that. And now we're going to anchor that blue block. So make sure the part is selected, and we're under the Model tab. Right here is Anchor. Click Anchor, and that sets your part anchored. If we hit play, that part isn't going to go anywhere. Gravity's not going to do anything. A player hitting it's not going to do anything. So let's hit run now and see what happens. Nothing. It's just sitting there. The other parts in this game are still free to be moved if a player ran into them, because they aren't anchored. And with that bit of knowledge on anchoring, we are done with this video. I hope you gained some knowledge on how to use a toolbar to move, scale, and rotate your parts, and also a little bit more about anchoring and collisions. Keep going with the course and watch the next video where we look at using the Properties window to move, scale, and rotate parts. I'll see you then.